Hello. Welcome to our Hangout on the ISO 9001 revision. My name is Maria Lazarte, and I'm ISO Social Media Manager. ISO 9001 is one of ISO's most well-known standards, with over 1.2 million organizations worldwide already certified to this standard. It provides the requirements to help companies demonstrate that they can offer their customers consistent, good quality products. It also provides a framework to help them streamline their processes and to become more efficient at what they do. The standard has inspired a number of sector-specific documents, specific applications for industries like the automotive sector, the medical sector, local governments, and many more. But the standard is now being revised. On average, a new version of the standard is released every 7 years since its publication in 1987. The next revision is expected in 2015 and will be an important one, which is why I'm here with Dr. Nigel Croft, one of the foremost experts on quality management and conformity assessment. He is the chair of the subcommittee that is revising ISO 9001, and today he will talk to us about the revision process, how it's going, what's new, and what are the next steps. We will be following your comments on Twitter using the hashtag ISO 9001GH. The event today is it's going to be centered around the revision. So if you have very specific questions regarding implementation of a particular clause, then send us an email to customerservice@iso.org. So hi Nigel, how are you?
Hi Maria, I'm very well. I'm in a heat wave at the moment at a conference in Germany, so I'm going to take my jacket off and be a little bit less formal with all of this.
All right, thank you very much for joining us from Berlin and from taking the time to talk to us. So maybe can you introduce ISO 9001 by telling us a little bit more about it and how can it help an organization, and also who are the intended users?
Sure. Well, I think most people know ISO 9001 has been around for over 25 years now. It was first published in 1987. The intent of ISO 9001 is to provide confidence to customers of an organization that that organization understands who the customers are, what they want, and can consistently provide a product or a service that meets those customer needs and expectations. So that is the fundamental reason for ISO 9001. It's to provide confidence to an organization's customers. Now, in doing that, in implementing the requirements of ISO 9001, of course an organization has benefits to itself in achieving that. You know, and typically we see organizations who implement an ISO 9001 based quality management system seeing improvements in internal communications, in the way they work, sort of breaking down the interdepartmental barriers, understanding the processes better, reducing waste, helping them to be more efficient, and so on. They are what we would call secondary benefits. They are not the prime objective of ISO 9001. We have a sister standard to ISO 9001, which is the ISO 9004 guidance standard, which provides guidance on good practices as to how to use a quality management system to really achieve organizational benefits. So ISO 9001 is primarily focused on the organization's customer, providing that customer with confidence that they will get what they're expecting, nothing more, nothing less, and that they will be hopefully satisfied with the performance of their supplier.
Okay, so if over 1 million organizations are already reaping the benefits of this standard, why is ISO revising it?
Well, I think like anything in life, if we look back 15 years. The current version of ISO 9001 is the 2008 revision. The 2008 revision was just some minor adjustments that we made. The standard that we have today was essentially developed in the late 1990s and minor revisions in 2008. I think to answer your question, probably the best way is to say in the late 1990s, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. We didn't have Google Plus. We didn't have the cloud. We didn't have wireless internet access. You know, many organizations were still controlling their documents by, you know, putting a stamp control copy on stuff. And the world has moved on. The big challenge that we have is to move with the world without making such huge radical changes that we don't allow for continuity with what's been done up until now. The standard we have today is a very good standard. I believe it's a very good standard. But when we listen to the users of our standard, not only the certified organizations, but other people who are using the standard and maybe not choosing to become certified, then they're telling us, look, you need to move with the times. And so what we're trying to do in this revision is to bring the standard up to date, to allow it to cater for organizations who are, you know, using cloud-based systems, who are using enterprise-based quality management systems, who are, you know, really moving forward in high-tech organizations, but at the same time not make it obsolete for or unusable for those small businesses in developing economies who maybe don't even have access to the internet. So it's a fine balance that we have to achieve. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, about, you know, what are the specific objectives. But basically, the broad terms, it's to bring it up to date, make sure it stays relevant for the next 15 years.
Well, thank you very much for that, Nigel. That is a very relevant point indeed. For those of us who are not familiar with the way ISO reviews the standard, can you tell us a little bit more about the process and who is involved, perhaps? Yeah,
sure. ISO has a process which is called its systematic review. That is there to ensure that documents or publications of ISO don't just sit on the shelf gathering dust and nobody's using them because they're out of date. So ISO's systematic review process requires every ISO standard, every 5 years, in broad terms, to be subject to this review from ISO's members, asking the question, is the standard still used? Should we scrap it and throw it away? Is it still being used and it's still fine the way it is, in which case we reconfirm it? Or is it a good standard but it needs bringing up to date? So when we went through the systematic review process for ISO 9001 just over 2 years ago, the majority decision of the ISO member bodies, and I'll talk more who are the ISO member bodies a little bit later, the decision was, yes, the standard is a good standard, but yes, it does need revising to come up to date. That revision process then comes into the hands of the ISO technical committee responsible for that revision process, which is my subcommittee of Technical Committee 176. And then we start by looking at what do we aim to achieve. You know, we come up with a design specification. What is and what isn't the intent of the revision? How do we see the new standard looking? That is then balloted by ISO members. So we get a very clear remit as to what we can and can't do, based on our own consensus building process. And then we go through the various drafting phases within ISO, within the sort of techie group who actually make the first drafts. Then it goes out to the ISO wider member body. And then where we're at today is we've just published the draft international standard, which goes out to a wider audience and also provides that opportunity for them to give us feedback.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the stage, the draft international standard stage, and what exactly it involves?
Sure. We have within the specific working group that is within my subcommittee, we have around about 80 active experts who are nominated from their member bodies from around the world, either nominated by the national standards body, and that doesn't mean that they are standardization professionals. They are people from industry, from services, from government, consultants, auditors, and so on. People with a very broad knowledge base about quality management. They then sit together based on the design specification I'll talk a little bit about what we want to achieve with this revision and how the design specification looks. But they then sit together and they come up with what we call a working draft. That is very much, you know, I would say a scruffy document that's full of corrections and, you know, crossings out and everything like that. It's not a secret society. You know, we've been criticized. Why don't you make the working draft public? Well, we don't make the working draft public, even though it does very often get out there. We don't make it public because it's work in progress and because it's not sufficiently polished to go out to a wider audience. Once that working group has achieved a decent level of consensus, which happened at the beginning of last year, that then goes out as what we call a committee draft, which is circulated to all the ISO member bodies. Those ISO member bodies then bring in their own mirror committees, in other words, the interested parties within their particular community. They comment on it, they criticize it. You know, Fred over here may say, we think this is great. Joe over there says, we think it's terrible. And it's up to the mirror committee to, let's say, reach a consensus on what is the position of Argentina or Brazil or United States. What is the position of the International Automotive Task Force, which is one of our liaison members? And then they submit those comments back to the technical committee. We then go through, address each one of those comments. We had over 2,000 comments on the committee draft, which is normal. You know, ISO 9001 is a very high-profile revision. Everybody wants to, you know what's going on and comment on it. So our working group then takes all those comments, addresses them, decides whether they're relevant, looks for any trends. You know, are a lot of people saying the same things? They polish that a stage further, and then, which is where we're at now, in early June, they publish the draft international standard. That's essentially the first public airing of the new draft revision of the standard. So anybody, anywhere in the world, can either purchase via their national standards body or via ISO, or access, if they participate in a member organization and are willing to make comments, they can access the standard, they can input their comments via the national standards body. They don't send their comments directly to us on the technical committee. They can provide those comments, and that deadline for that is, I believe, October.
So you were telling us, Nigel, how the committee makes sure that ensures that there's a wide representation in the type of comments it addresses during the revision process, and how it gets input from all experts and all users of the standard.
That's right, and I think it is important, Maria, that people know that ISO does have an extremely robust consensus building process. It doesn't accept individual comments from individual people, because you could imagine we would go crazy if we were to get 1 million comments, all slightly different from different individuals around the world. But every individual has the opportunity to comment via their national mirror committee or via their liaison membership if it's an industry organization. And we rely on those mechanisms, those mirror committees, to provide us with national consensus so that we can then understand what the different members are telling us. And it's a very well-tested process.
Okay, well, thank you very much for explaining this to us, Nigel. Perhaps now we can get to probably what the question that everyone is expecting, and that is, what are the biggest changes so far in the standard? I mean, it's clear that the standard still has some way to go in terms of the revision process, but perhaps you can give us like a sneak peek into what's big and new in this important revision.
Certainly, yeah. I think, first of all, to answer the question properly from the starting point, I will tell you what our vision statement is within Subcommittee 2 of TC 176. We want our products, and that means ISO 9001 and ISO 9004, to be recognized and respected worldwide and to be used by organizations as an integral component of their sustainable development initiatives. Now, where are we today? 1987, when ISO 9001 was published, it was essentially the first management system standard. Since that time, ISO and a number of other organizations have developed a whole portfolio of management system standards. Things like ISO 14001 on environmental management, the OSHA 18001 health and safety management, which is now going to become a future ISO standard. We have the energy management standard, and so on and so on. So the first major impact that people will perceive is a change in the structure and sequencing of ISO 9001. We are aligning our standard with the new high-level structure that's been agreed between all the ISO management system standards bodies. Within the quality management arena, we took an active role in developing this so-called high-level structure, affectionately known as Annex SL because it's published as Annex SL to the ISO directives, and that defines a consistent look, touch, and feel to all of ISO's management system standards, whether they are brand new management system standards, like, for example, the anti-bribery management system standard that's just been starting work now, or whether it's revisions to existing traditional standards like ISO 9001 and like ISO 14001. So that high-level structure and common text, there is no reason why, for example, a quality management system should describe the documentation requirements as being slightly different from the way in which an environmental management system defines it. If we're essentially trying to reach the same objectives, then let's use the same words. By doing that, we facilitate life for those organizations who choose to have a single management system within their organization. Personally, I don't like the phrase integrated management system, because what you have is a management system. This is the way we run our business, and you may need or want that management system to meet the requirements of ISO 9001 for the quality of your products and services. You may want it to address environmental concerns. You may want it to address health and safety or energy conservation or whatever. It is a management system. It's the way you run your business or your organization. So by adopting that Annex SL structure, we hope that will make life a lot easier for many, many organizations. And we were very clear when we came up with our design specification. This is what we will do, and it was overwhelmingly voted in favor by our members. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, is and this needs to be explained very well, is the incorporation of what we're calling risk-based thinking into the management system. ISO 9001, in its original iteration, was very much a sort of clause-based prescriptive set of requirements. In the year 2000, we introduced what we call the process approach, managing interactions between different functions, different activities to achieve an outcome. And managing those processes and the process interactions using what we call the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, which most people are very familiar with. A quality management system is about prevention of problems. It's about anticipating what might go wrong and doing things to avoid producing so-called non-conforming product. We have to recognize, and I think there's been increasing recognition, that not all processes are equal. Not all processes have such an impact on the objectives of the quality management system, in other words, on the product quality. Some have an indirect consequence, some have a very direct impact. In some cases, a non-conforming product may cause minor inconvenience. In some cases, it may cause death or multiple disasters. So we've incorporated into the idea of quality management system risk-based thinking. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a full risk management approach. You know, my colleagues in the risk management community, and ISO does have its own standard, ISO 31000 on risk management, they would possibly quite correctly say, well, isn't a quality management system all about managing risks to the possibility of producing non-conforming product? And yes, it does. But the traditional way that we have done that, and the way that organizations are very comfortable with and very familiar with, is using this understanding of the processes, understanding of the not only the what we call the operational processes, but also the management system processes and their interactions. Things like understanding the needs and expectations of customers and other interested parties. Things like understanding the context of the organization. Are you a very high-tech, high-risk business in a high-tech environment, or are you a small mom-and-pop store selling low-risk products in on the corner of the street? Understanding that context and thinking about the risks, thinking about the cause and effect. If how much control do I need to exercise on this process in order to have confidence that the outcomes will be effective? And so what we've done is we have three main cornerstones now for the standard. We maintain very strongly this process approach, understanding the organization as a set of interrelated processes acting as a system. We need to manage each individual process and the system as a whole, plan, do, check, act. And the amount of rigor, the amount of discipline, the amount of attention will be governed by, in some cases it may be intuitive, but this risk-based thinking. How does this process affect the outcomes that I want to achieve? In some organizations, some very, let's say, demanding organizations, then absolutely a full risk management approach may be appropriate, but it's not appropriate for all small, low-risk organizations to require them to carry out full risk assessment and risk management. That was quite a long answer. I hope it makes sense.
Thank you, Nigel, for that answer. I think it's very interesting how you explained the introduction of risk on quality on ISO 9001, and you've tied it in with how it relates to ISO 31000 as well. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about what will the new edition mean for those that are applying the sector-specific versions of ISO 9001.
Sure. I mean, there are a lot of sector applications. Our remit within ISO TC 176 is generic quality management system requirements. There are a number of other ISO standards, such as the ISO TS 16949 for the automotive industry, and there are a number of non-ISO standards. An example might be the aerospace standard, AS 9100, or the telecom standard, TL 9000, which are based on our standard. Now, obviously, the sectors or the groups, industry groups, will be looking, and we are working very closely with, I would say, all of them, to make sure that they understand and have the opportunity to comment and to participate on what we are doing. And in fact, all of those three sectors that I mentioned are active participants in the revision process. So they have their inputs. They may not always get what they want. We are looking at generic requirements. They have to take care of their own sector requirements that are very specific to their industry. But the way we hope it will work, and let's be very honest, some are more convinced than others about what we are doing. The idea is that they will learn to know and love the standard that we've come up with. We're not there yet, let's be very clear, but they will take that and they will add on their sector-specific requirements to the new version of the standard. We'll deploy that throughout their supply chains. In many cases, we are actually incorporating some of the good ideas that the sectors have had over the last 15 years in taking those generic, those sector-specific questions and incorporating into the generic version of the standard.
Thank you, Nigel, for this. I think it's very clear what sectors must do. Another question that we received was, how did ISO 50001 for energy management systems influenced the current revision of ISO 9001?
Well, I think right from the beginning, this comes back to what we call the Joint Technical Coordination Group, which is the forum whereby all the management system standard committees get together. And in fact, the leadership of the group that developed ISO 50001, I wasn't directly involved in that, but I did take part in their meeting in Beijing, which was their final meeting before they published that standard a couple of years ago. We have an ongoing dialogue, and it's an iterative process. You know, this so-called Annex SL that is applicable to all management system standards, it's not perfect. It can never be perfect. That will have to evolve. And the idea is that we will, all of us, provide feedback into that forum to improve the Annex SL as necessary as we go along. We have to balance that, though, against the requirement to have some stability. So we don't want to go fooling around with that every 6 months or every year just because it doesn't specifically meet what a particular standard wants it to meet. We follow the overall direction, and unless there is a very specific reason why we cannot apply it or it is generating significant difficulties, then we are following that in the interest of the bigger cause, the bigger good, which is the harmonization of management system standard requirements for those who want to have a single management system.
Thank you, Nigel. Nothing is perfect, right? Which is why we have continual improvement. Another question that we received is about the interpretation of the new requirements. What can you tell us about that?
First of all, the advice that we give to people is to access the DIS, access the draft standard, look at it, read it through. We will have a validation process undergoing in the next few months, so I hope people will have access to the standard. This week, in fact, we have one of our working groups starting work on the implementation guidance for ISO 9001-2015. That will be labeled as ISO Technical Specification 9002. So it's nothing to do with the old ISO 9002 standard that was extinct 15 years ago, but it's implementation guidance for ISO 9001-2015. The feedback that we get in general is that ISO 9001 overall is a good standard right now, but there are concerns about the way it is being understood and implemented and audited. So many of the criticisms that we get are not related to the standard itself, they're related to the way that organizations are actually doing what is in the standard. Rather than us just pointing the finger and saying, oh, that's the problem of the consultants and it's the auditors, and we have taken that on ourselves and we are saying we have an important role to play. One element in our mission is to ensure that we provide the adequate guidance to make sure that our standards, 9001 in this case, are used properly for the intent for which they were designed. So we're being very proactive about that. It's in its very early stages. As I say, the task group is having its first meeting this week, but our plan is to have that guidance available for publication when the ISO 9001-2015 standard is published, currently scheduled for September 2015.
Great, thank you, Nigel. Maybe we have time for one last question.
From my side, yeah.
Can you tell us what are the next big steps in the revision, after the DIS?
Yeah, the draft international standard is when it's getting close to the final version. Obviously, we still have room for changes, we still have room for improvements. So we will be looking at all the individual comments that come in from the member bodies over the next few months. The deadline for submission is October. We have a meeting scheduled, a face-to-face meeting, and any number of virtual web-based meetings where we will look at all the individual comments. We have to make sure that the draft ballot does actually pass and is approved by the ISO membership. We then go, and it's pretty sure we will go to what's called the final draft international standard. There is always an option now in ISO to go straight from the DIS to the final version of the standard, but that is very, very unlikely to happen. Because of the repercussions and the implementations and the importance of 9001, we will almost certainly go to a final draft international standard. That will then be published early next year, early 2015. And then it's pretty much all over bar the shouting. It's then the formatting. There is a formal ballot, yes or no, and the plan is that the standard will be published in, as I say, September 2015. We're already working with ISO's Conformity Assessment Committee, ISO CASCO, and the International Accreditation Forum, who are responsible for the oversight of the whole certification process. They've already defined there will be a 3-year transition period. So organizations who are currently certified, in theory, they will have up until September 2018 to meet the requirements of the new standard. But of course, we want to encourage them to get started and to start absorbing and taking advantage of the new revision from now. I mean, the DIS is available. It's not definitive, so we're a little bit wary about saying you must do this and you must do that. But certainly organizations should take cognizance of what's in the draft and start working towards making the necessary changes, if any, to their management system. My premise is always that an organization that has a good, robust quality management system should have no problems whatsoever in adapting that system to meet the requirements of the new standard. Organizations who've done maybe the minimum that they've absolutely needed and tried to get away with doing less than the minimum in some cases, they may have problems. And they are the people who possibly are the ones who have not been achieving the expected outcomes from their quality management system, which at the end of the day, what it's all about is providing confidence to the customers that you can provide a consistent, conforming product to them. So they're the next steps. We look forward to getting the feedback. It's an iterative learning process, very, very strong consensus building process, as I said.
Thank you, Nigel, for this, and thank you very much for your time today. I know it's very hot in Berlin, and you've been very busy lately. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. If you would like to get a copy of the current draft of ISO 9001, please contact your national member body or visit our website at www.iso.org. If you have any more specific questions that have not been answered today, please send an email to our customer service team at customerservice@iso.org. Thank you very much for joining us. Please send us your feedback for future Hangouts. We hope to get Nigel back here maybe at a later stage to tell us a little bit more about how the revision is progressing and the new edition. But until then, thank you very much, Nigel.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully next time I'll have a better connection.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.